I'm Ken Jacobson, one of the programmers for DocLands, and I want to welcome you to DocLands and to this Q&A for Current Sea, directed by Christopher Smith. First, I want to thank our supporters of the festival, our sponsors, our California Film Institute members, and of course, you, our audience. Now onto the film. Current Sea had its world premiere at the 2020 Big Sky Documentary Film Festival, and we're thrilled to have it here at DocLands this year. We're especially pleased today to be joined by director Christopher Smith and journalist Matt Blomberg from the film. Christopher Smith is a documentary and commercial director and producer. His first feature documentary, Tiny, a story about living small, premiered at South by Southwest in 2013 and was screened at festivals around the world. Current Sea is his second feature documentary. Matt Blomberg is a correspondent for Thomson Reuters Foundation in Cambodia. And welcome to you both. Congratulations on the film, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Great, thank you.
And Matt is joining us from Cambodia, so fingers crossed, technology is working and all is good on that front so far.
So far, so good, Ken.
So I wanted to just start out with a question for Christopher. You know, how did you first learn what was happening with Paul Ferber at Kosei Island and his work with Marine Conservation Cambodia? What was your introduction to the work Paul was doing?
Yeah, I was actually just looking around online for interesting stories, interesting environmental stories to perhaps make a short film about. And I wanted to try to apply this idea of kind of more observational thriller kind of vibe that, you know, Cartel Land had just come out. And so I was looking for a story that could be an environmental story that really had that kind of action and sort of, you know, investigative type of a perspective. And so I was looking online for a story and I came across a long form nonfiction piece on a website called Narratively, which wrote about Paul and his work doing the patrols mostly. And I came to find out later that that work was actually based largely on the work that Matt did. And I met Matt, my first trip out to meet Paul in April of 2016. And basically to get in contact with him, I just sent an email. I found MCC online and sent an email and, you know, just to kind of get more information and see if it would be something they'd be interested in participating in. And within about 2 weeks, me and my producer had flown out to Cambodia and we're on the small island, and Matt happened to be on the island at the same time, and that's how I initially met him.
Gotcha. And so Matt, at this point, well, what year was this, or when was this approximately, Christopher?
Well, that must have, well, sorry. No, I reckon it was about 2014, wasn't it, Chris?
2016.
16.
Yeah.
I'm stuck in a time warp here. I've been here for I don't know how many years now.
So at that point, Matt, how long had you been covering the story and had known Paul?
At that point, I was only. It's pretty mad kind of story how we all hooked up. Actually, I'd been working at a newspaper in Cambodia, and was slowly learning about things that were going on in the ocean. This fighting between Cambodian and Vietnamese fishermen, and at one point, I decided that I quit my job at the newspaper because I thought this story of Paul is so cool that I want to go and tell it before someone else does. And I was a reporter with a camera, but I decided I was going to go and make a film about it because it had, you know, there was a lot to it. So I quit my job and actually went to the island, and there was a long process of getting Paul to trust me as well. But I guess in a way, I kind of hijacked, or I don't know if Chris hijacked me or I hijacked Chris, but I had gone there to make what would have been a really probably D-grade effort at making a film because I had no idea of how to do it. And by chance, you know, this piece that Chris talks about that he read on Narratively it's kind of funny because Paul was kind of embarrassed by that piece. We'd been writing these kind of hard-ass stories about how they were basically vigilante kind of pirates out there, you know, enforcing the laws that the police weren't. And then this story that Chris found, there's a classic line in it where the writer refers to Paul's candy blue eyes, which everyone on the island always thought was pretty funny. And anyway, when Chris got in touch with Paul got in touch with me and said, hey, these guys from America want to make a film. And as I think we mentioned in the documentary, Paul is not, or was not, overly fond of the media and reporters or anything mainstream, really. So he kind of called me and said, you know, oh, there's another, you know, filmmaker / journalist who wants a look at me. What should I do? And I said, and then I was lucky that Paul called me, and then he kind of asked me to come to the island and be there. And then when I was there, I got to meet Chris and the producer, and luckily got to be included in the whole thing. I mean, the cards all fell in the right place at the right time, I think.
And was it that initial meeting, Christopher, where you began to think, you know, I'm not just going to tell Paul's story, but I'm going to partly tell Paul's story through Matt's reporting and his story? Or did that come later?
No, that's right. I think, you know, I went out there with the intention of making a short film. Mostly I've been working on this film, actually the one that I pitched as part of Doc Pitch at DocLands this year, which I've been working on now for, I don't know, 6 years or something. So I was just feeling a lot of frustration with the process of that, and I wanted to do something quick. So I went out there thinking it was going to be a short film. And when I met Matt, it was actually through talking to him and realizing the whole context of the environment that, like the political environment that MCC operates in, and all of the social issues related to the overfishing going on down there, and just how it really truly is a life and death struggle for a lot of people, both in terms of, you know, the violence that happens, but also in terms of the poverty and getting enough to eat, and, you know, just the radical changes that Cambodia as a country is going through at the moment. You know, I realized there was a lot more there to mine. And I would say that my initial idea about what the film could be, which I think was a little bit more darker and probably a little bit more cavalier and would probably be a worse film, to be perfectly honest with you, was, you know, through talking to Matt and working with him and going around and filming, it really morphed to be more of an optimistic film about how a small group of people with very little resources can actually make quite a big difference, just by dedication and by doing the work and by living in the place where they're trying to make a difference and learning how to make change on the ground. And, you know, Matt was key to unlocking a lot of that for me and, you know, giving that context. And I will say that for documentary filmmakers out there, working with a journalist is an amazing way to really learn about your topic and really able to explore it. And, you know, a lot of the work in the film, I got to give Matt credit to, because he knew about all this stuff before I got there. And without him, you know, it would have taken me a lot longer to know who to film, where the boats were coming from, where to get translators, all of these things, you know, Matt provided. And we also thought it made sense to give him an associate producer credit for that role that he played in addition to just being on camera.
And what was the process of kind of winning over Paul's trust for you?
For me?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was probably a little bit easier because of the work that Matt did. You know, Matt had a harder time getting him to trust him, but I think that maybe having the positive experience and relationship with Matt kind of gave him, helped him to be a little bit more trustful of what, you know, I was trying to accomplish. Also, I think, you know, that's a skill that as a documentary filmmaker you have to develop, which is being able to get your subjects to trust you, because in this day and age, with the way that media can be really bad for people in addition to being good, people are more aware and concerned about how they're portrayed on camera. And so you have to work an extra bit more to establish that connection and that trust. So I think that, that had a lot to do with it, with both Matt's work and also just doing my best to kind of alleviate the fears he had or concerns.
Matt, I wanted to ask you, back when you were working for that newspaper, was the story of illegal fish trawling being covered, in the Cambodian media or the international media for that matter? Or were you one of the few people, publishing stories about this?
I'd seen absolutely nothing about it, and that's kind of why I got so excited about it. There's for a long time been a lot of good journalists in Phnom Penh in Cambodia. It's kind of a bit of a haven for reporters in the region, or it was before it became a one-party state in the last few years. There wasn't a lot of reporting about it at all. So when I went down to look into the first thing that got me down to the coast was the death of a Cambodian fisherman at sea. And when I went down to look around, I found out that this is not at all an isolated incident, that these guys are fighting at sea, every night if both sides are in the mood, kind of thing. It hadn't been, there was some of the old Cambodian reporters working at the newspaper, they kind of knew that there were these Vietnamese boats that fished in Cambodian waters. And that's kind of an ongoing theme with, there's a big animosity between Cambodia and Vietnam that kind of stems from the French pulling out and redrawing borders that Cambodians claim cost them a bunch of land. For some reason, it was something that no one had ever got stuck into. And I guess one of the reasons potentially is that the authorities down on the coast, the Cambodian authorities, had for decades been getting paid to allow this to happen. Which kind of makes it a bit difficult to report on, because when you go to the Cambodian authorities for quotes or for their side of the story, it's a distorted view if you even get a response from them. It was very fresh, which is why I went down there. And I wrote a series of stories about different mad things that were happening in the ocean, like these Vietnamese, they're called tung chai, these little round cane boats that would only be kind of 3 meters in diameter, that guys get dropped in the open ocean and they just float around for kind of 12, 14 hours every day, and then get picked up again in the evening by these mother boats. And every season, some guys get dropped off and don't get picked up. And I was fascinated by all this madness going on in the sea. And it was around the same time that I don't know if you guys are familiar with Ian Urbina, a reporter who at the time was with the New York Times, and he wrote a series of stories called The Outlaw Ocean. And it was similar stuff, but on a much larger scale of how, no one polices the ocean because of the amount of resources and that it takes, and because there's, confusion over who's responsible for what. And it was like this great frontier for stories that no one had looked into. So, it was all very fresh. And also I was trying to keep it to myself because I knew there were some really cool stories. And I was trying to keep it as close to my chest as I could until I went bang, quit the paper, go and make this film about it. And the story that brought Chris to Cambodia, when I read that story, I kind of went, oh, shit, someone else is onto this guy, But luckily that story was also what helped, is kind of at the root of where this film came from. So, we all got lucky, I think.
For this is a question, I guess, for either of you. It's talk a bit, if you can, about how Paul got the idea for the Marine Fisheries Management Area, the MFMA, because it's in some ways it's a pretty sophisticated idea, and it's not something you just, I would imagine, wake up one day and say, aha, an MFMA, that's the trick. How did he kind of come to that idea and begin to really put the pieces together?
Matt, I think you probably would be able to answer this better.
Yeah, I mean, Paul lives on that island. Well, he doesn't anymore, but at the time he was living on that island, you know, with his family and a team of, at the time, maybe 6, 8, 10 others. And I'd say he was largely driven by almost anger, you know, because he, at the root of it, he couldn't sleep at night, and he also he's a diver, right? And he cares about the environment. So, I mean, he's a really practical dude, and I guess you said it's kind of complicated, but it's also kind of simple, you know. Dump some concrete and see if what happens to these boats. And they trialed a couple, and they learned that this works. And legitimizing it, that's a whole nother process, you know, going through the government to get it done.
That's what I was really thinking about is, I mean, putting those maps together and then bringing in all those different administrative partners and then getting everybody to agree. I mean, that's quite a task.
It's a massive task, and it's still, I mean, the part of the game that he was playing is that he had people in Phnom Penh in the government that were, you know, that believed in him and kind of supported what he was doing. But at the same time, he was interfering with, on the coast, a kind of a little world that had existed for 20 years, whereby all the local authorities were getting paid to allow this to happen. So everything he did on the coast kind of rippled through to Phnom Penh. And then you can see in the film there's parts where he gets stopped from operating and then he's free to go again. And that is kind of a battle between the officials on the coast, who he's just an absolute headache for, and the officials in Phnom Penh, who could kind of use him in a little bit for his expertise and his credibility in this kind of conservation industry. He'd get brought in to kind of be paraded on days where the government was celebrating conservation or fisheries or something like that. So he was playing these two. I mean, it's a mad game that he played, and he potentially end up in a hospital before his time because of it. I mean, it absolutely wrecked his head. And in the end, like the creating the concrete blocks he's like, all right, no one who's supposed to be doing this is going to do it, so we'll do it ourselves.
Yeah, I think the other piece too is that they do have a pretty strong research arm. And, you know, they, in addition to having Anik, who kind of leads the research on the island, they also partner with all these organizations from around the world, like Seahorse International Conservation Fund of Canada. And then they've hosted teams from different, you know, organizations. They have a dolphin project now. So, you know, everything they do is rooted in research and in providing the evidence to go about it the right way. And even though Paul is, you know, really has kind of a rough exterior and can be seen as vigilante in a lot of ways, he's also very good at playing politics. And in Cambodia, everything, and Matt, you can talk about this, everything's politics in a way that beyond even in the US, I'd say, where there's just so many different angles. Like all the powers recently been devolved also to the governors and to like local areas. And those people will have agreements with neighboring provinces in Vietnam and things like that. And then one village will have different interests than the next village, and nobody's really centralizing all that. So, you know, Paul had to really navigate getting all these people to row in the same direction while also battling these entrenched interests who were opposed to that. And sometimes people who work for him fighting these trawlers would then go and work for the government, start getting paid, you know, and he would be fighting them essentially not long after. So things would just change like that. And it's very fluid.
Interesting on that. Sorry, Ken, to jump in, but Chris, were you ever there with a guy with Niet? He's a fisherman's guy.
That's thinking about. I never met him except when he came to drop the blocks, I think, on the last day of the shoot. This guy who used to work with them and then was hired by the government. And Matt, maybe I'll let you say it because you probably know more about that.
The guy, the official we see in one of the last scenes of the movie, or someone else?
He's with that entourage. That guy's a really big deal and really well-meaning and good for the country, I'd say. But one of the people he was with was a local fisheries officer. But he was actually there using a GPS receiver to mark where they were dropping the blocks so he could then go and report it essentially to the illegal fishermen. So that's the kind of stuff that they deal with on a daily basis.
Yeah, this guy was we think a plant for a long time, and he was kind of unbelievably supportive and on the same kind of, you know, he was out to get into the thick of things, and then it turns out a couple of years later that he was always a fisheries officer. We knew that, but we're always playing this game with is he a good guy or is he not? And it turns out that this guy, was with us for a couple of years, and the whole time, apparently, he was feeding all the information back to. I mean, we don't really say it in the film, but I'll say it now. Like, the Fisheries Administration and the illegal fishermen work together.
And that's it.
And the Marine Police, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say this aloud in Cambodia, but basically, any racket that goes on in Cambodia is overseen by the authority that should be policing that racket. Basically, you know, like illegal fishing is overseen by the Fisheries Department. Human trafficking is overseen by the Trafficking Police. You can't really do anything here you can't do anything illegal here without it being overseen by someone who should be stopping that thing.
I wanted to just get back, ask you both about the fishermen, the local fishermen. How are the local Cambodian fishermen doing these days, and has anything changed, gotten better, gotten worse from their perspective since the film was shot?
No, I mean, no. The situation on Koh Sad, the island that we are on in the film, sure, around that area there's more fish to be caught, but that's hardly enough to go around. You know, there's the country eats fish. Fish is the main source of protein here. No, the situation hasn't changed. There's still the boats are still coming in. The Cambodian fishermen are still kind of, you know, play second fiddle to the Vietnamese because they have smaller boats, less equipment. I'd say they're also less aggressive in some ways.
Yeah.
No, that hasn't changed.
It also hasn't been terribly long since we finished the film. You know, they're still dropping the blocks as far as I know, because there's so many of them to drop. And, you know, I think part of what their mission is to educate people about the benefits of it. And I think that's still an ongoing process. So I think we'll see some change, and they're definitely seeing more fish, like Matt just said. But, you know, in terms of making a meaningful impact on the local fishermen, I don't know if it doesn't sound like that has happened quite yet.
I mean, one of the key things was getting the government guys that you see in the film to buy into this. And the guy who helps drop the blocks, he's the head of the fisheries in Phnom Penh. And if he buys into it and he thinks it works, and it seems like he does and has, then he will try to expand and replicate the model that Paul has put in place. And when that happens, then we will see serious large-scale change. The fish populations will come back. And as Chris said, in that area, the environment has changed completely, massively. And while you're not allowed to fish inside the protected area around Koh Sad, as you see in the film, that acts as a breeding ground for species to grow and move out and repopulate the areas around. And yeah, there's dolphins again, which there wasn't for 10, 15, 20 years, which is huge.
That actually was going to be my next question about scaling up this project, and whether, you know, what potential you guys see for that to happen, not only in Cambodia, but are people in other parts of the world looking at this project as well?
People in other parts of the world should start looking at what they eat. I mean, as long as people want to eat prawns and fish, then we're going to have this problem without a doubt. I mean, the population isn't shrinking yet. Yeah, you can, around Cambodia, I'm sure that they can expand it, and it can have effects in Cambodia as far as the local fishermen not having such a difficult time to look after their families. Chris, what do you think? Got like expanding it globally?
I think that's what I hope personally that comes out of the film, is that people could look at their model. Like the idea of using conservation areas as these like breeding grounds is not new. In fact, Sylvia Earle's organization, Mission Blue, I think that's like, you know, one of the things that they do. And also Obama designating the marine protected areas off Hawaii and Maine, which have since been sort of weakened by the Trump administration. But what I hope is that people see the film and look at the way that they did it on a homegrown basis and with, you know, relatively little resources and apply that model. Because we tend to project a Western way of doing things. And so Cambodia has this massive NGO industrial complex that parachutes in, you know, tries to make change in the way that we know how to do here in the US, and it just doesn't work there. And, you know, and it, you know, the solution in Cambodia that is good for Cambodia and a solution from, I don't know, Zimbabwe is good for Zimbabwe and vice versa, you know. So, you know, I think the idea is like looking at how to address these problems on a local basis. But in addition to that, I would say that I did a Q&A as part of the Woods Hole Film Festival with a researcher from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. And this is exactly the area that he works in. So there is a push among the conservation community to adopt this on a larger scale. And what he did in particular was actually work on tracking the wildlife to see exactly how far they go once they mature and swim out of these areas. So it's really interesting work.
One of the, you know, things that happens at the end of the movie that's surprising in some ways, but and also very encouraging is when Rashama is put in charge of MCC. Paul decides to step away. She's promoted to the position eventually, I guess, of executive director. And that, you know, that act of succession is a really profound one and has a lot of, you know, implications for how projects like this can really succeed in the long term, I think. Can you talk just a bit about her and how the organization is doing these days?
Yeah, I'll start, and Matt, if you have anything to add. You know, it's a huge responsibility for Rachana, and you know, she's 100% earned it. I mean, she's super passionate about working for MCC, and that's like every time I've ever talked to her on camera or off, she was always like, "This is what I want to do for the rest of my life," and like, I want to change people's attitude about the ocean and about conservation work, which is still a relatively new concept for, you know, citizens in Cambodia, having recently recovered from a massive genocide and just, you know, trying to go through a development process, you know, very rapidly, and all of these things. Like conservation is pretty far down the list of things we're concerned about. But the fact that she knew that and, you know, just went for it, like, speaks a lot to her and her generation that's up and coming there. And you know, I think that it's the right thing to do, and Paul recognized this because, you know, really being a Barang or basically a foreigner, a white foreigner there, can give you a weird amount of respect with people, but there's also a certain amount of suspicion about your motives and about, you know, like what you're trying to get out of situations and things like that too. So to really have a permanent lasting change, I think it was necessary to hand it off to Rachana. And also the idea, I think, that Paul's always championed, and that and part of the reason we made this movie more inspirational, optimistic, rather than a critique, is that it's about inspiring the next generation to really take up the mantle and like, you know, get into conservation work and to solving some of these problems and not have to rely on Western NGOs.
Yeah, there's no doubt that Rachana wouldn't have been able to do the things, or, you know, a Cambodian wouldn't have been able to get away with a lot of the things that Paul led in the beginning. I mean, and it is a really interesting handover because Paul went in head first with his team of big, burly, strong, aggressive men, and they kind of did all the grunt work of clearing out, you know, a lot of the illegal fishing that was happening around the area, which Rachana wouldn't have been able to do. You know, she would have got shut down really quickly. But now it gives it, you know, the fact that Paul's moved aside and kind of allowed Rachana to take over, I agree. I think it's a really good move. It looks good in terms of, the idea of NGOs and conservation organizations or the development industry should be to let local people do it, right? Because they know how to, they understand the situation better. And yeah, while she's at the helm, you can see it's just kind of gone from strength to strength. They've got a lot more sponsors now, and they're bringing in a lot more, researchers, scientists, and the island is buzzing at the moment because there's so many people there, because there's so much wildlife there now.
And that's before the film gets released, so hopefully it'll even just kick it up with any luck.
Oh, you won't be able to get there once the film is released. They'll be full.
Yeah, and we should mention that anybody can visit the island. They're actually have a bit of a voluntourism model where you can go learn to dive on the island, or you can go volunteer for a while. And it really is off the beaten path. And it's a good way to learn how to do ocean conservation work and learn how to scuba dive.
Good way to learn how to grow up as well and look after yourself. Anyone who wants to go there, there's no babysitting. I've actually had a fair few Cambodian students kind of contact me and say, hey, I want to go to that island. That's really cool. And then reports back sometimes are like, don't send those princes and princesses down here anymore.
Good to know before people run to the website and sign up. Christopher and Matt, is there one thing you'd like to leave people with, about the film and about the work that MCC is doing and just about the situation with, fish trawling in Cambodia?
I would. I think that the big message, and one that we didn't really get in the film, but we talked about it a lot, is that MCC is a really good example of, grassroots direct action having a positive effect. I mean, Chris has heard me on about this so much, probably, so he can block his ears if he likes. But Cambodia has this development industry that exists, NGOs, and it's an industry, it's a sector. There's thousands and thousands of people who work in it, and there's conservation NGOs here. The biggest corporate conservation NGOs, I'll call them, have been here for 20 and 30 years, and still the destruction of the forests and the oceans it's only increased. Because these NGOs have to follow the rules, they come in and they partner with the government, and they also have their own kind of image that they need to retain as a squeaky clean kind of NGO. And to be honest, they get bugger all done. They don't get a lot done. Whereas Paul kind of went in head first and did things that would be both illegal and immoral. But the end result is he's got a protected area where the sea life is coming back, while these other NGOs, their staff live in villas and drive expensive cars and visit, they go to visit the forest or the ocean once a week or once a month, whereas these guys actually live in the environment that they're trying to protect. And I mean, it took them 4 or 5 years to get it done, but these other guys have been at it 20 years and they still haven't managed to have an effect. So that's the big message for me, is that sometimes you need to get your hands dirty, you need to break the rules to get things done.
I agree with that. Really, the people who should be commended are people like Matt and other environmental journalists, locals in particular, who really put themselves in harm's way to get these stories out. And also the local activists who, really do put themselves at a great deal more risk. Ratchana's pretty protected now because they've been sort of legitimized through this MFMA, but there are groups out there who are doing other kinds of conservation work who are, being threatened or killed or imprisoned, and that's true in developing countries around the world. So those are, the real kind of people I admire. And then lastly, I just like to say that, the film will be released in a month or two. And, for people who want to tell their friends about it, we have a Facebook page just under Currency, and a website, currencyfilm.com, that they can, kind of be on the lookout for that. And it actually, I don't know if I should say the date, but basically somewhere around the end of September, it'll probably come out, and we're in the final steps of negotiating when that'll be. So it's pretty soon.
Terrific. I have to ask Matt, just can you give us one, maybe a story you're working on now that you're particularly excited about or think is an important story? Because with the amazing internet, we probably can read that story.
Yeah, I mean, with the amazing internet, you can read, I think, all my stories, except for the ones that I tell after dark on Friday and Saturday nights. Right now, I mean, I work for Thomson Reuters Foundation as a trafficking and slavery correspondent. I'm part of this program that's just focused on these issues. But an interesting one that I'm working on now, I mean, it's not as juicy as currency, but it's children being used to front there's these little pockets around Phnom Penh, and there's a lot of development in this city, and they're often in little alleyways between two big developments. There'll be these little timber shacks, and they're often built over kind of like fetid, swampy areas where wastewater collects that are just kind of ignored. Anyway, I've been driving past these places for years, and every now and then I stop to talk to these kids who are out the front. And out the front of these are these kids, these wide-eyed kids kind of standing on the road, and the kids could be 6, 7, 8, 10, 12, 14. And you stop and ask the kids, you know, what, hey kids, and they say, do you want to buy some crystal meth? And you say, yeah, how much is it? And they sell in little bags of crystal meth for $2.50, and then also renting you this little shack to go and take it in and kind of have your whatever that does while you're sat looking at this kind of swampy water. That's the story that I'm going to be working on in the next couple of weeks. How I'm going to kind of tell it, I'm not sure, because, you know, without going and actually doing that, which I'm obviously not going to do, it's a bit tricky to tell it. Yeah, that's probably the only one that's of any interest at the moment. But there's plenty out there. There's lots of stories about stuff in the ocean that kind of led up to this film that are on the internet. If anyone's interested, I'd recommend everyone go and read Ian Urbina's Outlaw Ocean series. If you're interested in this film, if this film, you know, got you excited, Google Ian Urbina, New York Times, The Outlaw Ocean, and read those, because they're unreal.
And your article about Paul's MFMA is in mangabay.com too, which people can probably check that out.
Yeah, I mean, if people are interested, Google my name and Paul Ferber, and you can read a lot of the kind of other bits and pieces that we've done around it. Paul's moved to Thailand with his family and is building a zombie-proof apocalypse castle, complete with a moat and air rifles.
That's right. We forgot to ask about an update on Paul. So what in the hell are you talking? Tell us just a bit more about this. What's going on with Paul? Has he lost his mind?
No. I think he has his mind better than most people. I mean, he's withdrawn from this crazy world that we're all stuck living in. And I mean, lucky for him, he's kind of set himself up in a way that he can. He's a man of the land, you know. He can build stuff, he can grow stuff, he can breed animals, and he's teaching all his kids to do the same thing. So those kids that you see on the film are now aged, I guess, 8 to 15 or so. And I mean, those 4 kids, they could run their own small country, you could say cult by now. But yeah, they've got this bit of land in the south of Thailand, and they are, I guess, preparing to withdraw completely from the humans. And I mean, that's his thing, you know. Chris. Yeah,
I was going to say, Christopher, why aren't you shooting this right now?
Well, I actually learned a lot from that too. I think Matt's probably talked to him a little bit more recently than I have. Last I heard, it was also going to be sort of a eco-tourism conservation area. So his wife is from Thailand, and they had a bunch of land. So when he handed it off to Rachana, and it just seemed like a better move for him to not be in the picture as much, my understanding is he went back to kind of start working on this conservation area, which he had told me about previously. So, but yeah, it sounds like he's also, you know, setting up his COVID fortress.
Yeah, he still Facebook Lives as much as he used to. You know, he'll go for a walk around the garden and he's just kind of videoing himself picking some rambutan off the tree, and then here's the chickens, and I mean, you can just, the sound is beautiful. All you can hear is cicadas and wild animals, you know, or domesticated animals, his chickens and stuff. He's living what many people would call the dream, I'd say.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you both for being with us today, and also just, you know, basically thank you, Christopher, for teaming up with Matt. I mean, what a great partnership, and you know, what you were saying at the beginning about, you know, the value of filmmakers partnering with journalists. I couldn't agree more. I think the film is a testament to that. And Matt, thank you so much for the great work that you're doing. We're excited to hear that the film is going to be distributed, and we urge everybody in our audience to tell everyone they know about the film.
And stop eating shrimp.
All right.
Cool.
Thanks, Ken.
Yeah, thank you guys. Bye-bye.